Welcome to part 2 of this short two-part video series from the Carleton University Library. These videos introduce the first research case study in the Lib 101 series, Find Primary Sources. The featured case studies present strategies for finding primary sources related to a range of topics. These two videos focus on finding primary sources to answer the historical question, what was the marriage bar in Canada in the 20th century? Part 1 introduced strategies for using search engines, and Part 2 introduces strategies for working with librarians and/or researchers to find and access information. To recap, until the late 1960s, women employed in white-collar work in Canadian organizations such as Carleton University often lost their jobs when they married. These jobs were reserved for men, particularly those who were married, and therefore considered the breadwinners of a family. This practice of excluding married women from certain forms of work is referred to as the marriage bar, and this practice was common in many countries, including Canada. What strategies could be used to find primary sources that might explain the origins of this employment practice in Canada, where primary sources can be defined as items that are directly associated with their producer or user and the time period in which they were created? A primary source reflects the authority and perspective of someone who directly experienced what they are describing. From the Information Literate Historian, 3rd edition. This video introduces 3 strategies for consulting with a librarian or researcher to access primary sources. Strategy 1 is to consult with a Carleton University librarian or subject specialist, which can be a useful strategy for finding primary sources. A list of librarians and subject specialists can be found on the Carleton University Library website at library.carleton.ca. Click on Research Support in the top navigation, and then Research Help. Scroll down the page for an alphabetic list by subject of the librarians and subject specialists available for consultation. In this case, you could start with the Government Information Librarian. Given that the marriage bar may have been a formal government policy, they can assist with identifying relevant materials. To consult with the librarian, you can send an email. In this case, in an email, the Government Information Librarian suggests starting with secondary sources to identify relevant cited sources, and in particular, a federal report entitled Sex in the Public Service, which was published in the 1970s. We can search for this report in Omni, and this search results in identifying the book or report entitled Sex in the Public Service, written by Kathleen Archibald in 1970 and published by the Public Service Commission of Canada. Because the publisher is a federal government agency, this is a government document. Given that the report was published in 1970, it could be considered either a primary or secondary source. In the original email, the Government Information Librarian identified 2 pages with information that could be relevant to answering the historical question being asked. These pages suggest that the marriage bar was practiced by the Government of Canada and suggest that the relevant piece of legislation and a primary source could be the Civil Service Act of 1918. The report also suggests that changes to legislation were made in the 1950s due to social and political changes after World War II. As such, a consultation with a Carleton University librarian has been very helpful in identifying primary sources that are relevant to answering our historical question. Strategy 2 is to consult a librarian at the Library of Parliament. To contact a librarian, click on Contact Us in the top navigation of the Library of Parliament website at lop.parl.ca. The library email is listed, and you can email library staff directly. In response to an email to the Library of Parliament inquiring about the marriage bar practice from 1921 to 1955, dates suggested by reading the excerpt from the Sex in the Public Service PDF that was supplied by the Carleton University librarian, a Library of Parliament librarian responds with information that confirms that legislation existed that seemed to restrict the employment of women in the federal civil service, but not necessarily other levels of government, the broader public sector, or the private sector. The librarian was able to report that Section 36 of the Civil Service Regulations stated that no married woman whose husband is living shall be eligible for appointment to the public service, and that on page 14 of the PDF for discrimination, employment, or occupation on the basis of marital status, there is a footnote that states that marriage used to be a bar to continuation of employment in the federal public service. However, the repeal of relevant regulations in 1955 removed obstacles in the way of permanent status for married women officials. The librarian confirms that without clear dates, it is difficult to find copies of the relevant acts, and they've been unable to locate the relevant statutory instrument or legislation that would have implemented the marriage bar at the federal level in the 1920s. So the strategy of consulting a Library of Parliament librarian has been helpful in that we now have identified primary sources that can help us answer our historical question, and we've also confirmed that certain primary sources may be unavailable. Strategy 3 is to email researchers directly about their sources. For example, the initial online search identified the paper Economics of Marriage Bars by Irene Mosca and Robert E. Wright. The authors do not cite the source of their information about the Canadian marriage bar. They do, however, share their email addresses. In an email, Irene Mosca indicates that the relevant sources were the 1962 International Labour Organization, or ILO, Report on Discrimination in Employment and Occupational Status on the Basis of Marital Status, Parts 1 and 2. Mosca shared the PDFs of these reports, which could be considered primary sources. These reports do cite relevant legislation that could further help us answer our historical question, what was the marriage bar in Canada in the 20th century? To recap, consulting directly with librarians and researchers can also be a useful strategy for identifying primary as well as secondary sources when answering historical questions. In this case study of the marriage bar in Canada, it appears that this was a practice enabled by Canadian federal legislation, and that further research is needed to determine if organizations in other levels of government, as well as the broader public sector and the private sectors, also practice this approach to the employment of women. This is the end of this video.